The church is a family. I think we all know that. It's one of those things that if you've been a part of the church for very long, maybe since childhood, you were kind of raised with that mindset, right? But I'm not sure we entirely know what that means to be a church family in full. And I'm not sure that all of us ever will. But I know there are some things that we can all take in. Some things that we can all catch up with and learn regarding the biblical concept of a church family. With that in mind, I want us to read Acts chapter 2, beginning in verse 41, and we will end in verse 47. This is right at the conclusion of the day of Pentecost, where Peter and the apostles preached Jesus Christ. And it says in verse 41, so those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul. Many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together, and all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God, having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. Now, before Pentecost, there was a group of followers, disciples of Jesus Christ, who met together, as Acts chapter 1 and verse 14 tells us, they were devoting themselves to prayer. After Pentecost, 3,000 some souls who had received Peter's and the other apostles' teachings, they were baptized and they all became a family. They worshiped with one another. They learned together from the apostles' teaching. They fellowshiped with one another. Those who had more wealth began to share with those who were what? Less fortunate, those in need. They gathered in each other's homes. They praised God together. You can honestly read into this. They would laugh together. They would cry together. They would pray together. They supported each other, and they shared their lives with one another. And in fact, you might say they indeed did display the actions of a loving church family. However, when you read that scripture, what are some of the thoughts, or let me ask you this, what are some of the first words that come to mind? What are your thoughts when you read this? I want to hear from you. What is something, when you've read that, and I know if you've been to the church very long, you've read that many times, haven't you? What are some of your thoughts that come to mind when you hear Acts chapter 2, verse 41 through 47?
Well, I think it's the Christians helping each other in times of need, and they do. Sometimes they send truckloads of help to people. That you're a church family, whether you're in Pasadena or whether you're over here in LaPorte, you're still a big family because we're all in the Lord's church.
That's right. So definitely a church family that looks out for one another, and no matter where the need may exist, they're going to find a way to help that need.
But your local congregation that you're with is much closer
That's right.
because we know each other. And if there's a need here, all they have to do is to let us know. And immediately, this family, they've been burned out before, and yet this family has been taken care of. And right now, we've had several that have been in great need, but the church family is providing and helping them right now.
What else comes to your mind when you hear Acts chapter 2, 41 through 47?
The 3,000 being baptized at one time is the one thing.
Yeah, that sticks out because you go from 0 to 3,000, that's a pretty big advancement in your church membership.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Charles? Constantly together. Yeah, absolutely. What else?
They were all one accord. I know Miss Dinwiddie said that basically.
All in one accord. You mean they all own Hondas?
Just one Honda.
One Honda, yeah. They all fit in it.
It's not a hatchback. You'll wait.
It's a hatchback. That's what I'm buying is a hatchback. Can you see me driving a hatchback?
No.
My feet are going to go through the floor.
Better get a moonroof here.
Yeah, it does have one, so I guess I'll stick my head up through that. No. Now, that accord means what?
Together. One mind.
I think of the word harmony.
Yeah, yes.
Jonathan, so during this time, a lot of the Jews were coming back from far away also.
That's right.
So what it looks like is a lot of them moved there and stayed and probably sold all their other
That's
stuff.
right. When they were there for Pentecost, and this took place, it's a radical change of their existence. Each person that made that choice. Now, there were some that lived in Jerusalem, I'm sure. But if you read that chapter, what does it say? They came from basically everywhere. And you imagine what a change of existence that would have been for anyone in that situation, right?
Right.
It's a great point. In the back?
I was thinking of how they gave their hearts to the Lord.
How they gave their hearts to the Lord. In other words, to use a pop cultural term that's become big, and I don't really like it, but I'm going to say it anyway. They were all in, right?
It didn't take long for them to be convinced. And nowadays, they hear, they see, we have the word, and it takes a lot of begging for people to come to the Lord. When it shouldn't be that way. It should be you read the word, you hear what God has to offer, and it's our part to just give.
So their hearts were pricked, as the verse says prior, and they responded and were baptized and immediately were committed. What else? We had Al?
I see a sense of excitement and anticipation.
Yeah, Alan, here's one of the things that sticks out to me. I see those people who are baptized on that day, they were excited to tell somebody about it. If you've gone to church most of your life, let me ask you, are you still as excited to tell people about your church family as you were 20, 30 years ago?
And are we still anticipating as much as they were on that time?
That's right. Now, what were they anticipating, by the way?
The return of
The return of the Messiah. Return of Jesus Christ. Second coming.
What sticks out to me is that seeing that they were Jews, that they, after listening to Peter and the rest of the apostles, they were willing to listen and to follow the teachings of those.
Yeah, because Myrna, I don't think for us in this room, I only know of one person in this congregation that is of Jewish heritage. There may be others, but I only know of one. We're not talking about just some easy little transition. Right?
No, they're talking about
It's not an easy transition to go from being a Jew to a Jewish Christian. And there was trust me when I say there was a process from this point forward. They didn't just all of a sudden everything they'd known from the Jewish understanding they'd had their entire life just fell off somehow miraculously. No, they had to grow. They had to process, right? You know, I've heard this passage taught from the pulpit, haven't you? And I've heard it taught in Bible classes. I have, though unfortunately, heard us talk about this passage with a lot of what I call yeah buts. You know what a yeah but is? Well, they'll say, I've heard preachers and teachers say, as the local church, we should just do the best we can in the areas of benevolence and fellowship and teachings, and you folks just make sure you show up for all the services at the building, go to the fellowship dinners, put some money in a collection plate, and don't worry about all that other stuff in Acts chapter 2, 41 through 47, because that's just not realistic. You ever heard that? Problem is, I don't see any. Do you see a yeah but in that passage anywhere? I've got a nagging suspicion that God expects a little more out of his people. Forgive me for what I'm about to say, than once or twice a week attendance at a church building, a few dollars in a collection plate, and making sure you show up at a fellowship meal or two throughout the year. Now, with that introduction in mind, let me share with you. It has been spoken by some that the church of 2022, we're talking about modern day, right? Lacks resemblance in some big ways and some small ways to the church of the New Testament. That even though the restoration movement, if you've studied that, you know it began with great intentions, right? We wanted to get back to being the New Testament church. And in fact, we should still be striving to be as closely as possible to what? New Testament church. If you're new as a Christian, I want you to learn that we are striving to be the church we read about in the New Testament. Now, there's still more we can do. Now, here at Waters Road, I'll share these things for those that may be watching who don't know. We take of communion each Sunday, the first day of the week. Why? Because we believe, based on God's Word, that this is what they, the New Testament church, did. Correct? You know, some churches out there take it once a month or on a Saturday or a Thursday. We come together on the first day of the week and we share communion. Like many other congregations, we are an a cappella congregation, which means we worship without the assistance of what? Instruments. Why do we do that? We just hate instruments? We don't, as I've heard said, you don't believe in music, do you? Yes, we do. Why do we not worship with an instrument? Because we believe that the New Testament church worshiped God without the addition of instruments. Here at Waters Road, we meet again on the first day of the week because we see and believe, based on the New Testament, they met on the first day of the week.
Can we go back to the end?
Yeah, go ahead.
You remember when I did a lesson in this class on singing?
Yes.
I did some research. No religion, no Christian religion used an instrument until
About 300 years.
About third or fourth century.
Yep. Absolutely correct. But let me stop and ask you, are those things alone what makes a New Testament church? Those things alone, worshiping on the right day, taking the communion on the right day, not using an instrument, is that alone what makes us the New Testament church?
That's part of the foundation, right? But it's not really the entire.
It's not the entire story, Alan.
Yeah, that's what you start to build on, but you don't just stop with that.
Our foundation is Jesus Christ, none other. As important as those things may be, and listen, I'm not up here negating the importance of those things. There are those things that are much deeper than how we meet, how we sing. Some of those deeper things in my lifetime, and I'm 44, some of those things maybe as well in your lifetime, some of those deeper things have been overlooked or cast aside because we've decided, well, that's sort of irrelevant in our modern society. Now, I am personally of the belief, and maybe some of you are as well, that some of those things we've cast aside over the years that we thought weren't that important are the things that both defined the special identity and the work of the New Testament church. Now, let me look at this. Over the last, how many of you have been alive for 120 years? I look at Elizabeth. She's the closest in the room. Praise God. If you've been a part of the church or you know the history of the Lord's church here in the United States, we have invested a great amount of time and treasure in disagreements within the brotherhood over various topics. I'm not going to debate the value of each investment, but in all actuality, we've lacked attention because we've been focused on some of these disagreements. Our attention hasn't been as much as it should be on the fundamental characteristics of the New Testament church. In fact, I'll put it this way. We have argued over a lot of things, and some of you are old enough to recall some of these topics. But I want to ask you, I want you to tell me, those that have been members for a while, what are some topics that have been points of contention and even division within the Lord's church here in the United States over the last 120 years? Name me some things that we've argued about, okay?
Communion.
Well, when I first joined the church, they were arguing about children's homes, whether we should support them.
Okay, and that is known as the cooperational or anti-cooperational movement. In other words, there was a disagreement that said, well, the church shouldn't be giving any of its money to a children's home because that children's home isn't the church. And so there was a big debate. And guess what happened? Churches did what over that issue? They split. Okay? That's one. Musical instruments. That's been how many churches have divided over that over the last 100? And in fact, you go back into the early 1900s and before, guess what? One of the first major splits, in fact, the Christian church and Church of Christ came about because of the instrument. What else? Having a kitchen. That's, for those of you that are new, you may be hearing this going, what? Yes. There's been split, division over whether or not in our building we should have a kitchen.
Or even water fountain.
Even a water fountain. Even projector screen.
Carpet.
Carpet. Yeah, churches divided over the color of the carpet.
Sometimes definitely no.
But those are more on a congregational level. Anna?
I went to when I was younger, we went to visit my sister in San Antonio, and we went to one of the Church of Christ over there. And the first thing when we walked in, when they were doing the Lord's Supper, they had a female that I had to go.
So to summarize that, there's now, and it's actually more a modern, I was going to hit on this in a little bit, there's some more modern contentious moments and divisions that are happening right now over women's role within the church, right? What else?
Not having Bible class. You teach your own children.
I've said it some more time.
Not having Bible class.
That's right. We have congregations right around us that believe that we are in sin because we have a Bible class.
Women teaching.
Women teaching in a Bible class.
One cupper.
One cup or more. I can tell you, there was a church, when I went off to school, there was a church in the town where I went off to school that was one cup in it. And I went there not knowing that, and I wanted to sit up front. You understand why? Because I want to be the first to drink. What?
Some of them know that only there's one cup. They actually have two.
Yeah, true.
One for each side.
You know, in the 70s, there were churches of Christ that divided over men's facial hair. Dress code. I'll never forget my mother being hurt during the 80s when there became such a contentious disagreement about women wearing pants. There are so many other things. Having elders, okay.
Way back, I lived in DeRidder, Louisiana for a while, and I understand back where you're talking about, the women sit on one side and the men sit on the other side. You did not co-inhabit. You ever heard of that?
I haven't. That's pretty interesting. I don't know that I'd want that. That'd be tough because I got to sit with my family.
Kathy and I, we both attended at DeRidder, Louisiana. Of course, I grew up there and they came when we were adults, but we split with a group that did not believe that you could be a soldier. And we lived near Fort Polk. You could not be a soldier and be a Christian.
Wow. The point is, those are the kind of things, and that's not a complete list, is it, brother? Those are the kind of things that in the past have been points of contention and even division within the Lord's church. Just because it's 2022 doesn't mean that still ain't happening, right? What's that?
Same Satan.
That's right. Still the same Satan, sowing discord amongst the brethren, and sometimes we're the vehicles of that discord, unfortunately. But once again, I tend to believe, as I mentioned earlier, that there are a lot deeper and more fundamental characteristics of the New Testament church that maybe we've not given the proper attention that they're due. I mean, let me just be honest with you. How many of you, when you visit a Church of Christ in another area, you've been trained to look for certain characteristics? And when you walk into a church and something may be a little bit different, those are what we call trigger points, right? And again, let me say, I'm not denying their importance. But is it possible that we've given so much attention to those certain things that our focus on those things has come at the expense of other characteristics which are more fundamental to our existence as a New Testament church? All right, let me give you a little idea about the basic direction of this lesson. Let me put it this way, because I believe there is one characteristic that we most often in the local church miss the New Testament mark in our congregations, and that is the idea of the church being an authentic, loving family. Yeah, we know and we understand that we as Christians are to be a church family, right? We even sometimes call each other what? Brothers and sisters. You know, it's funny, in different churches, I've seen it more so. Some churches I've been at don't use that a lot. Some, here at Waters, we're kind of in the middle somewhere. We use it some. I don't ever hear us from the pulpit call out brother so-and-so and sister so-and-so. Maybe occasionally. But we have a history of looking after each other here at Waters Road. When someone's facing some kind of medical challenge or some other difficulty in life, and I just want to brag on you, because in many ways you do a pretty good job of doing that, and we even pray for people when they're facing medical or other hardships in life. Over the last few years since I've been here, probably it's going to be 4 years in May, June. We've had people that have placed membership here that have said, Jonathan, one of the reasons I placed membership here at Waters Road is because of the fact that you guys pray individually for people. And they told me that it really means something to them. Especially when they're the person that is going through that difficulty, right?
Jonathan,
And I got to say,
okay.
I got to say, we do it here at Waters Road more than any other church I've ever been a part of.
There's one couple I know that I asked them, or it was brought up, how they ended up here. And they said that they went to another Church of Christ. They weren't met, they weren't greeted. It's just they went in and had services and went out, and nobody said anything to any of them.
Yeah,
That means a lot.
Jerry,
to people.
I still remember this the day I tried out here. I had spies all over this building. Y'all didn't know it. I had like 6 or 7 different families that were here that morning too. And part of their purpose was to tell me, how did they treat you? Because in my mind, if you treated them well, you'd probably treat me well.
Being kind of greeted here in the foyer is important, because we've had people before to say, whenever they were greeted, and that's why that they came back then, so that they was,
That's right.
want to be a part here. And like you say, I have, and I'm sure everybody in here, if you visited anywhere away, and we did a lot of traveling in the military, sometimes you walk in, they look at you, nobody comes over and speaks to you, you go and sit down, nobody speaks to you, and you get up and you say, well, I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah, Elizabeth, when we were in Austin, and I didn't have a church to serve in at that point, right? We moved in 2011. My mom was with us. She was visiting from Alabama. And I took her with us. And one of the things that influenced me to become part of the Southern Hills Church family, where I ended up being the minister, one of the things that influenced me there was the fact that they loved on my mama that first Sunday. There were churches that we visited that didn't even speak to her. But the fact that this congregation just loved on my mama spoke volumes to me.
I think the Southern hospitality is much better than our Northern friends.
Now, wait, we can't say that out loud.
I just want to brag. Crystal at that front door.
Crystal, yeah. Where is Crystal in here?
I love that.
Yeah.
She came to this church 2 years ago, right in the midst of COVID. I didn't know her from Adam. Some of you may have. That young lady is the most committed greeter we got in that back. If you come in that door, she's going to make you feel what?
Welcome.
Welcome. I love that. All right. Don't you love it when a preacher's going along and he goes, but? I don't like that word. The church family relationship, if we're honest with ourselves, often takes second, third, or even fourth place in our daily life. In favor of who? Ourselves, our marriage, our parental relationship, other family relationships that we may be part of. In fact, you may not realize it, but in your lifetime, you're going to be part of many different families. Several families. If you stop and think about it, we've got our blood family. We've got our extended family, or I like to call them my in-laws.
Outlaw.
Or outlaws, yeah. You got your work family, right? You got your recreational family. If you've got a child who's been in football, baseball, soccer, choir, band, art, whatever it is, you've got that family. But when you take a close look at the New Testament church, the church family we see in the New Testament, we're going to see that that church family was of primary importance to those people. Not second, not third, not fourth. The Christians of that day made their church family their number one priority. Now, gasp. Like a gasp down for me. Do that real quick. Even more than their blood family.
Jonathan.
Let me keep going just a second. Even more than their marriage relationship. Even more than their ties to all the families that they were part of. That's difficult to hear in our modern Western culture.
I was going to say, as a preacher's wife, as we've gone around, there's been congregations where we were embraced, and there's been congregations where we weren't. But the saddest thing for me is we never lived close to our family. That's the reason I can give up my kids, because that's what they keep reminding me. Y'all didn't live close to us. And Dan always made it important to invite people over on holidays. We didn't get invited somewhere on holidays, but he would say, let's get somebody to come over. And one thing I miss about him was when a new couple would come in, he'd say, let's ask them to go out to lunch.
Go out to lunch. Yeah.
And I think that was because we knew what it felt like
To be without.
That's
right.
family. So the church was very important to be our family.
Sometimes we say, Jonathan, how can it possibly be true that your church family is the primary emphasis of your life? How can I possibly have my primary relationship in my life be my church family, and my relationship to my spouse be secondary, and my children be secondary? How can I possibly make my blood family secondary to my church family? I understand that question. I'm a father of 5. Truth is, though, if you read the New Testament, you're going to find out that's exactly what happened back then. And I think we're going to find out today, and well, probably not today because we're almost out of time already, but next Sunday we're going to find out that's exactly what the New Testament teaches. Does that concept of church family surprise you? Does it strike anybody out there as somewhat strange that the church family would be of primary importance, even over blood family, even over marriage relationship, even all these other family relationships? To me, it's a little off-putting. The Christians in the church here in the United States to hear a preacher or a teacher or an elder or a deacon say your church family should be number one. And if you're sitting there, I know you're not saying it, but I know that some of us are thinking it. Anna?
When I go visit my family down in Brownsville, the brothers over there always tell the brothers over there in Houston, they send their greetings. And that is something that's very common among the Spanish congregations, that we give our greetings to them when we come from a visit. But I notice in the Anglo congregations, they don't do
We don't do that as much. You're exactly right.
which we are, and then
We are a family, whether it's here at Waters Road or down the street. We're all part of one big family, right? But we're speaking today primarily about our local family. Christ's family.
He died for us, and if he died for us, we should be able to do everything for our.
You are so right, dear. Don't misunderstand me, folks. Jesus always encouraged loving relationships. He encouraged husbands to love their wives, right? Wives to love their husbands. Your children, any family relationship that you're part of, Jesus has taught us to love those people. Okay?
But you know, to me, I always loved the Old Testament, and to understand what God was trying to show us through the Old Testament that is what He placed in the Jewish community.
That's right.
That
Family.
Family was always.
How many of you watched The Chosen and saw the moments of family relationship early in that series?
But there is a passage in the Old Testament that says, if you leave your church, if you leave being a Jew and go out, you were killed.
That's right.
Because you were not doing what God wanted you to do.
Thankfully, it's not that way today.
Exactly.
John, sometimes talking about that, when we're moving, let's say we get a new job in another city, or we decide to move into a different house in a different neighborhood, we'll look at everything. The school system, the shopping centers, the neighborhood, and sometimes we forget to check out the local church because it becomes not that important to us, and if we're not careful, we're on an island by ourselves without a church family.
I did not think about that, but you are exactly right.
But I'm sorry to say, but when I was leaving Trinidad to come to the States, that was the first thing on my mind.
It hurt to leave your church family.
No, but to find.
To find a church
family.
family.
Find the church family before we moved here.
All right, let me make this clear. Not once, not even once, in Jesus' teachings or in any of his epistles did he say, quit loving and caring for anybody else but your church family. It's been my experience over the years, whenever I've talked to people about the biblical concept of church family, the first response I often hear is, well, you know something, Jonathan, that's the ideal church family. But that's just a pipe dream for us today. That'll just never work. That'll never happen in our modern culture here in the West. Maybe back in the New Testament times it worked because those people were very tribal in nature, but we're not as tribal in nature as those people. Yeah, we are too.
National tribal tribalness is alive.
It's still alive and well, brother.
The secular world, yeah.
Now,
Western still alive.
let me say this. If that's the way you feel, I'm not going to judge you. Because at times I've felt that way too. Sometimes I've looked at the idea of the biblical concept of church family and said, I'm just not sure that's possible anymore. But the Bible says all things are possible with God. Okay, Melba first.
Yes, please. Am I correct in thinking that I don't have a complete concordance, so I can't find what I'm looking for, but isn't there a verse in the Bible in the New Testament that says that someone who does not provide for their own family is worse than an unbeliever and infidel?
Yeah, we're actually going to talk about that next Sunday. Before we leave today, I'm going to give you 3 passages to look at. And one of those, that is Paul's words to the Thessalonians. It's a mouthful. I think it's Thessalonians. Oh, is it 2 Timothy? Okay. One of those that I'm going to quote is Thessalonians. All right. I'm also not going to stand in judgment of anybody who says, Jonathan, I'm not going to go there with you. I like coming to church here. I like being able to be at worship on Sunday morning. I like being able to come to a fellowship meal or 2 in the year. But I'm not going to make a church family my primary emphasis because, Jonathan, I love my husband. I love my wife. I love my kids. I love my blood family. I love my work family. I love my sports family. I love my band family. Whatever it is, I'm just not going to go there. I'm not going to judge you if that's what you're thinking. I just want to ask you to hang in there with me for a little bit longer. Come back next Sunday. Join me on Sunday mornings beginning May 8th. Because if you do, I think you're going to find out that the statement about the church family becoming your primary family is true. But listen, you got to hear this before we go home today. Just because a church family becomes your primary emphasis doesn't mean that you ignore your physical family in favor of your church family. Doesn't mean that you turn your back on your kids, you ignore your elderly parents or whoever it is in favor of the church family. God does not expect anybody to do that. But if you will join me next Sunday, we're going to continue to look at this concept of church family. But on May 8th, I want to encourage you to join me for the study called Church Reset. People have been asking, Jonathan, what is this church reset all about? It's all about looking at the church family of today in comparison with what we find, what we believe is taught in the New Testament. What we're going to do is explore the culture of that day and how it related to family relationships. To look at scriptural thoughts that bring out the nature and importance of that relationship of Christians in the New Testament church. All right. It's 11:30.
What were the three scriptures?
All right, let me give them to you. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
One of the things I struggle with, Jonathan, is I know that we're not a huge church, but even the size of our church, it's so hard to see everything.
And
Can't really hear you, Charles.
say it a little bit louder so they can hear you.
I said that I know we're not a large church, but even the size of our church, it's hard to see about everyone in our fellowship. And it bothers me that I can't do more than I would like to do. And I imagine there's a lot of you that feel the same way.
All right, the verses I want you to go home this week and read are Mark chapter 10, 17 through 30, and the parallel passage of that passage in Matthew 19, 16 through 30. That's the rich young what? Or the rich young man, whatever you want to call him. Also, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 10, 34 through 39.
What was the one after Mark?
We're going to look at Mark 10, 17 through 30, and the parallel passage of that in Matthew 19, 16 through 30. The rich young ruler, right? And then Matthew 10, 34 through 39. Everybody got those? All right, let's come back next Sunday ready to talk about those and continue this study.